Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Talking Tendons podcast. Today I'm going to start a little bit of a regular series talking about some new papers that have come out in the tendinopathy space that are really interesting. So over the next few days and probably month or so, I'll probably try and do a few of these. And that is leading up to a Mastering Lower Limb Tendinopathy course that is going on in Melbourne at the end, at the start of June. So I can link the details to this podcast for that, for anyone who's interested. So today I'm going to be talking about a systematic review that was published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine. Journal of Clinical Medicine is what they call a high quality open access journal. So it is open access. You have to pay to be published in this journal, but it's not one of the ones that you should really avoid because they're a little bit dodgy or a lot dodgy. This one is peer reviewed and seems to be above board. I haven't published in it, but from looking at the journal online, which I did when I read this paper, always a good place to start, actually. Just have a think about the journal and is it a credible journal whenever you're reading a review, because there are unfortunately many journals these days that aren't. The title of this systematic review is Does Additional Dietary Supplementation Improve Physiotherapeutic Treatment's Outcome in Tendinopathy? A systematic review and meta-analysis. So it's an interesting area because patients will often ask, are there any supplements that I can take? Is there anything from a dietary point of view that will improve my chances of getting better or improve my outcomes? So it is an important question. I think probably the biggest limitation of this review is that there isn't much evidence to answer the question available at this point. So the authors have, as you do in systematic reviews, completed a comprehensive search. They've looked at the yield of that search and identified studies that answer their question. And they were looking for supplements provided compared to some other generally physiotherapy alone or physiotherapy and placebo treatments. I think they described their comparisons in that way. The interventions consisted of any kind of physiotherapeutic approaches, so it could have been exercise or shockwave, etc., but it also had to include dietary supplementation. Okay, so that's what they were looking for, and the outcomes of interest were things like numerical rating scale, pain, VAS, visual analog scale, and also reliable and valid functional outcomes like the Victorian Institute of Sport or the Shoulder Pain and Disability Index for the shoulder. So that sort of gives you a brief overview of some of the PICO elements and how they define those. And they assess quality via the Cochrane Risk of Bias tool. They also then look to do some meta-analysis, and that is combining the findings in a statistical model to see if there's an effect for these supplements. Okay, so on to the interesting part. What did they find? And I guess again, this is the limitation. There's not a lot of evidence. There was only 6 studies, and they were really heterogeneous. So there's a really good summary of the info that they provide in a series of tables. So I'd encourage you to have a look at it. Table 1 gives the authors and generally the comparisons, the population and the demographic groups, so the ages and things like that. And there's a huge variation. So, for example, some of the ages are 15, the mean of 15 must have been, I imagine, some dancing population, because it is a flexor hallucis longus issue. Then you've got the more typical tendinopathy populations of 45 to 52. You've got different tendons, Achilles, patella, rotator cuff mainly, but also, as I said, the flexor hallucis longus in one of the studies. So there's very diverse demographics and site of injury, or site of pain or condition, I should say. And also, what's hugely diverse is the details of the dietary supplements. Now, they do give a very, very good summary table, as I say. Table 2, have a look at that for details of the dietary supplements. And they describe in every study the exact dietary supplements, the ingredients of the dietary supplements, and the assumed effect. So there's things like, collagen type 1 given in quite a few. Hydrolyzed specific collagen peptides, hydrolyzed collagen type 1. So that is an obvious one, and that's really designed for increasing, stimulating metabolism proliferation, trying to lead to some sort of, I guess, adaptive or healing response. There's also other types of supplements. So there's creatine in one, for more of an anti-inflammatory effect. There are also other supplements. So, for example, let's try and get these here. The other ones that were common are essential fatty acids, again for their potential anti-inflammatory effects. So essential fatty acids were one of the other supplements. There's polyunsaturated fatty acids, again for an anti-inflammatory effect. So I guess you can loosely divide the supplements and the effects primarily of the supplements into two groups. One more of a proliferative, adaptive effect, and the other more of an anti-inflammatory effect from some of the other types of supplements. So have a look at table 2 if you're interested. That's sort of a brief summary, probably not a complete summary of the types of things that they have looked at. So in terms of what they found from these supplements, and it's really important also to note that there's really, really diverse comparators as well. So the types of things they were doing as a comparator was quite diverse, and that's also important to bear in mind. And there was also quite a lot of diversity in terms of study quality or risk of bias. But down to the bottom line, what they actually found was that they did find evidence in a meta-analysis that there was some effect of favouring the experimental group, the one that had the supplements, versus the one that didn't. So there may be some effect. And remember, some people would really frown at this meta-analysis, some purists, because there are so much diversity in what they've done, but also in the groups, the populations. So from a clinical point of view, you might question whether it's actually valid to combine all these different groups. But if you look at the individual studies, there's some trends favouring, probably not statistically significant for most individually, but there's some trends favouring the supplement groups. So that was for pain outcome. So it's interesting, and it's probably worthy of further investigation. And I guess that's the phrase that everyone dreads when they're reading systematic reviews. You know, the phrase that pretty much every author ends with, which is we need to do more studies. And in this case, unfortunately, it is true. There's not a lot of strong evidence, I guess, from a point of view of evidence-based medicine to recommend any of these supplements at this point. However, if your patient is asking about them, probably the thing that you could do, and the thing that I do is point them towards the evidence and say, look, this is the evidence at the moment. This is you can find links to these things, and I know in Australia there's the PRAET study, PRAET, which has Tendofort, which can be bought online, and some patients will choose to take supplements even knowing that the evidence is underdeveloped, and that's fine. So it's a decision that they can make, knowing the evidence base that is out there. So we do need more evidence. There may be some anti-inflammatory effects. There may be some adaptive effects. And one of the interesting points the authors make is that potentially it's more beneficial than classic anti-inflammatory treatments, because it doesn't have the side effects, i.e. some of the gastrointestinal side effects. But they do also make the important point that perhaps anti-inflammatory treatments is not what we need for every tendinopathy patient anyway, which is a real debate at the moment, well, ongoing, I guess, for a long time. What is the place of anti-inflammatory treatments anyway? So we won't go into that today. Maybe I'll do another podcast about it at some point. I think I will, because I'm really interested in it, but hold that off for another time. Thank you very much for listening. I will link the systematic review, and it's a good one, as I say, to share with patients if they're interested in dietary supplements for tendinopathy. Thanks very much. See you next time.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.